Hi, welcome back to my channel. This is Psychic Medium Raymond Guzman, and today I'm going to be doing a celebrity psychic reading, mediumship reading on John Lennon. This has been a video requested many times over by many fans or people who liked the Beatles, liked John Lennon, and so I hope, to bring across information surrounding his death, surrounding, his energy, what was going on at the time, who was John Lennon. For those of you that are not familiar or that are listening, that are maybe the newer generation, younger generation, that never or doesn't know who John Lennon is, he was a member of the Beatles. He was a musician, a writer, producer. He was very talented. I want to say he was like an artist in many ways as well, creating art through music and songs. And he was like I said, part of the group The Beatles, which is a very popular group in the 1960s and 70s. He was married to Yoko Ono. So those of you that are not familiar with who he is, that is who he was. With John Lennon, he is someone that I get from his soul, is communicating through, is that there was a lot of questions regarding, his relationship with the Beatles. When he was in the group itself, what was the dynamic? We know what has been put out in the media, of course, what has been said, but what he wants to say is that it wasn't like people thought, they were like brothers, almost like brothers, that's how it was portrayed by a lot of people, that they got along. But in reality, he's saying that they really didn't get along. There was a lot of arguments, there was a lot of jealousy, there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of things that were going on in the midst when they were, in the group together, and it became something where it was his, like his baby, the group and the music. He loved it, and he wanted to see it flourish and grow. But again, he started seeing changes in a lot of the band members, like Paul and some of the other group members, and he just didn't like the energy that was coming through. It was very negative. Regardless of what was said about John Lennon, he was a very spiritual person, very awakened. His state of consciousness was very awakened. I want to say he was very advanced, beyond his time. Definitely get like 4D, 5D consciousness here. So he was very aware, very intuitive himself. He could read people, just by like read their energy, being like an empath. Looking at them, he would know who was good, who was not good for him. And I feel like a lot of this energy that surrounded the Beatles was very dark. There was definitely some things that a lot of the members were into that brought darkness into the group. And when I talk about darkness, a lot of pagan things, not pagan, but Wiccan, but darker, the darker side of Wiccan. There was a lot of this because, being a witch is not necessarily a bad thing. There's white witches that work, with good magic and whatnot. But there was definitely some group of people that were into magic, but the darker things in the group. And I do feel like it surrounded them. The record company, the guys that were, the guys that were in charge of the group themselves. It was just a lot of darkness that was surrounding them, and I do feel like he felt like, the direction the group was going in, they were trying to transform their image and transform them into something that he didn't really like. He didn't see that as, being authentic. And so this is where a lot of the issues began, and why he chose to kind of, get away from that and branch off into more into a solo career. It was a lot of tragedy, and there's a lot of questions whether or not the Beatles were cursed, because so many deaths occurred, to all the members of the groups. So many people, so many of them, passed on, or they've had tragedies that, that surrounded them during the, and after their time as a group. But I don't feel like there was really a curse, but I do feel like there was definitely some dark energy, like I said, that surrounded the group themselves. I do get that him growing up, he was kind of molded in a certain way to see certain things. His viewpoints of women was a little different. I do feel like he had some reservations. He didn't like, you know, how would I put this? How it's coming through from him is that he loved women, but he didn't like them to a certain extent. There was like this resistance. There was these issues that he had, with how he perceived or viewed women, in which kind of led to him being kind of different with them, very cold, very distant, very just very, in a way where it's kind of like you want to, take out your aggression or your anger on women, whether it's verbally, physically, whatnot. But as he got away from that group and he branched off solo, he transformed, and a lot of that negative energy kind of left him, and he was transformed in, he kind of started seeing things in a different perspective and shifting. I feel like when he was in the group, his elevation or his consciousness was really kind of, more at the 3D, 4D level, mainly at 3D. When I talk about 3D, it's the consciousness is like very low vibration. It's the, at the time, this would have been like the vibration that the earth was in. Many people would have been on that vibration, but it elevated up as time went by. And there was a lot of people during the 60s, that were considered hippies or considered, during that time, Woodstock, whatnot, that their consciousness was elevated. And so I feel like he was ahead of his time, like I said, but within the group in the early 60s, just like the energy surrounding all of this was very dark, oppressive. It wasn't a good mental state. There wasn't really happiness. Yes, there was money, but even with the money, he's saying that, there was a lot of crap that went on even with their money, record executives playing with it, not paying them out exactly what they needed. So he was upset at the record company as well. He was upset at a lot of these people that made promises that they didn't fulfill, which are things that we see with, we see it in the modern times, like we saw with TLC, that girl group. And they talked about, how they weren't paid from the record company. And for him, he worked so hard on this that he wanted that money. Even though he wasn't very materialistic, he wanted the money because he had plans and projects that he wanted to fund. But there definitely was some issues with money and where it went. I also feel like he was trying to escape away from many of the people that he considered fans. I mean, he really loved his fans, but I really feel that also at the same time he wanted privacy. And this is something that, he may or may have not discussed, but he really wanted to keep his social life, away from the spotlight. He wanted to be a little bit more private in many ways, but he knew still that, that there were people that were fans that needed him to be in the spotlight. So he, agreed to do photo shoots and do things that kept him in the public eye, but he wasn't necessarily happy, so to speak. I do get a lot with him that he had sleepless nights again. He had trouble sleeping. I do feel like there was nightmares as well that accompanied him. I do feel like he saw the angel of death appear to him at one time, whether this was in a dream or whatnot. And he actually did see that. And did he know he was going to be assassinated? Was he going to, he was going to be murdered? The answer to that is that he didn't know, but he knew that his life was going to be short-lived. And I feel like this is something that's kind of eerie, that, how he would know that. But there are some people that know more or less at a very young age that they're not going to live for many, many years, regardless, of what the circumstances are. And it's because of the soul and knowing their exit points and how they chose to leave, etc. I do feel like he did leave before his time. I don't feel like John Lennon was supposed to leave this world at the age that he did. and in the December 1980 when he was assassinated. I don't feel like he was supposed to leave at that time. His soul was supposed to be. But like I said, a lot of these things are predestined, and darker souls can alter some of this, here in the physical world. And so his murderer, the guy that killed him, I'll get into that in just a minute. Let me get into the next slide here so I can kind of discuss. This is John and Yoko Ono, his wife, who he was with the latter part of his life right before he was murdered. Um, he loved Yoko Ono, and I get from him that that was his, she was his everything. Was their relationship perfect? No. I do feel like she and him did get into arguments. There was definitely some, she was mistreated in some ways by him. Again, this is going back to his viewpoint of women. Also feel like he did suffer from some kind of mental oppression. I don't know if this was like bipolarism or he was, kind of uh, not balanced. But I do feel like there was definitely some issues that he had, and that Yoko Ono came into his life to kind of, help them with this. The problem here is that when I'm a psychic, so when I tune into energies and I tune into pictures, I kind of have to be very honest with what I'm getting. I don't see them as soulmates, even though he did love her in many ways. I also feel a darkness from Yoko Ono. And I feel like there was a lot of people that were fans, and I mean no disrespect to her or her family or fans or anything. This is just coming from me, what I see as a psychic. I can't sit here and lie, and I can't sit here and sugarcoat the truth. I'm being very honest, like I am in every single reading. And when I tune into her soul, I see a level of darkness. Now, this is not because she's, of her, her race or who she is. I believe she's a very beautiful woman. I do believe in this particular time and when this was shot, during these years that she was with him and married to him, she was a little dark. I'm not gonna lie. There's some darkness around her. I see it. Not so much with John. I feel like she was more in control of him than he was in control of her. I do feel like she had some darkness, so I don't know if she was practicing any witchcraft or into those things, but I definitely get that from her energy and her vibe. There's some darker energy following her, and I feel like she also is someone who's a very strong kind of psychic in some ways, very intuitive, but I get a lot of darkness to her. So I'm questioning here, by what the energy that I'm seeing here. It's very, very dark. I don't know what she was into, what she surrounded, who she was surrounded by, or what they both were being pushed into. But when I see both of them, I see John as light sitting next to her, and I see her as having this edge of darkness. So I'm questioning her level of love and commitment to John, and how loyal she was as a person to him. Was she really with him because she loved him even though she had his children, or was she with him out of convenience? But there's something dark here, something very dark, and I get that there was some backstabbing, some betrayal in all of this together, and during this time. And again, the general energy that I'm getting from John is that many people didn't like Yoko Ono at the time, and they still don't like her. And a lot of people feel that she's responsible for his passing, which is something that has been flowing out there, and I'll get into that. But I just get some darkness from her. And like she was holding on to secrets and things that he wouldn't have been aware of. I don't feel like he was in peace with her. And again, this doesn't feel like they are soulmates. So I don't understand why. Well, I do understand why as a psychic, why I'm getting this. And again, I don't feel like they were meant to be soulmates, but I feel like she had control over him. There was some level of manipulation here. People that would be listening to this may not agree with me, but I see it. I see it. When you look at the two pictures here, you look into the eyes, which are the windows to the soul. She has some darkness, and I get chills all over me when I tune into her eyes and I look into her soul. There's some darkness there, and a very manipulative type of energy that is aware of what is going on. Again, it's secrets, things that are hidden in the night, things that are buried, witchcraft, dark witchcraft, uh, occultism, uh, Satanism. There's definitely some darker elements that were attached or connected to Yoko Ono. When I get into John's soul, I feel like he was under a very kind of subdued state of mind. There would have been medications that he would have been taking, substances to kind of suppress his what he was feeling. I feel like a lot of this again was influenced by Yoko Ono. How he was like, again, I don't feel like he was mentally strong at this time. He knew what was going on, but it's kind of like somebody with that is kind of, how do I describe this? When someone is fragile, or they've gone through a lot in their life, and they just want to find true love. And I feel like with her, it was convenient for him. He didn't want people to speculate that he was, oh, this guy that's, an ex, Beatles member and is just single, and still, at his age, something is wrong. Why isn't he married and have children? So it was kind of more convenient, but I don't feel the love there, even though they did get married and they had children, like I said. At the soul level, I don't feel the love, and I don't see it. I don't see it. Some of you may not agree, like I said, may see that, but I don't. And what I get from all of this is that in some ways that she kind of now, she's moved on from him, but I do feel like his soul does stay around her, and she would, feel or sense him. But the Yoko Ono that we see here is someone that's entirely different now. I do feel like now she still has this darkness around her. She's still into some things that, that at her age now, that you would think people at that age would not be into. But I feel like it's different. It's a lot different than what it was when she was with John at this time. So she has kind of shifted. I don't feel like she necessarily misses John, but she definitely does think about him in a fond way. She's moved on from him, and I feel like in many ways she does feel responsible for, things that have happened or that went down that day that he was assassinated. So, I guess a lot of people would be asking, did she have something to do with his murder, being assassinated? It's very difficult to tell, and I can't sit here and confirm or deny, but I don't feel like she had anything really to do with it. But I do feel like the energy that surrounded her was a darker energy that if that the murderer, the person that assassinated John, carried as well in him. So I'm going to get into another slide here of Yoko Ono. See, this is another example, and the reason I chose to use this photograph is if you look into the eyes are the windows of the soul. I'm not looking at her lips, her nose, her chin. I'm looking at her third eye in between her eyebrows, and I'm looking at the eye. And this is how I read people. So take this kind of like a lesson more or less on how to read people. A lot of you ask, well, how do you read? Do you have developmental videos that show us how you read energy and how you read souls? Well, this is what I'm tapping into, her eyes. And even though it's a black and white photograph, when I look at the soul, it doesn't matter, if she's not living or she's across, the world. I can tell by the eyes of the photograph and the energy that she carries, her aura. It's someone that carries a lot of pain. There's a void in here, like she's holding secrets. And there is darkness that surrounds her, and this kind of anger that she had in her, whether it was anger because she wasn't entirely happy in the marriage with John, or she wasn't entirely happy with him being more famous than her or being more accepted. But I do feel like she was not accepted. There was people, fans, that made ugly remarks about her, and they thought that she was, just with him because of his money. But, what I see is that definitely there was not a soulmate connection here. Um, so that's what I get here. They had a lot of things similar together, a lot of traits and stuff, but there was just no real soul bond there. Interestingly enough, John is telling me that a lot of people around the world, they have seen him. He is working with a lot of people on the other side as like an ascended master. So a lot of people will dream of him, or they do feel him around, or they feel a strong connection and pull to John. I do feel like he is okay. He definitely didn't stay earthbound, which is kind of, a rare for people that are assassinated or murdered. But I do feel like he did move on already, and he moved on quite rapidly. And he knew that his legacy would live on. He is saying that people have done seances to try to contact his soul, and he's kind of laughing about it because he finds it very comical. On the other side, that a lot of people are still trying to do seances and call upon him and his soul. There's a lot of people that are fans, or younger generations that are intrigued. They grew up listening to their parents' music and that are still fans of John Lennon and the Beatles. So they have, people did do seances. They've tried to contact him. A lot of people have tried to channel him, and some have been successful. But he's laughing at a lot of this, and he says that sometimes he does come through and he kind of spooks them. That's kind of his mischievous side, to kind of teach them a lesson that, he wants to be at peace. He doesn't want to be contacted, like this is not a hotline to the other side, to the spirit realm, where you can just pick up a phone and call that person on the other side. But it's crazy. But there's a lot of people that have, swore that they've seen him in their home. They've seen appearances of him, in places that he used to frequent. And I do feel like he does visit, he does visit his children, Sean, and the other child, but he does visit them. And I do feel like eerily enough, Sean resembles a lot of John, and I do feel like, he's very proud of Sean, even though Sean has gone through a lot of struggles himself. But, I could go on, and there's a lot of more things that I could go on about in this, but due to the fact that he has living children still, and he has, Yoko Ono, I have to be kind of candid with some of the things that I know, but I can't say. But I do feel like in many ways, that his children, they do miss their father, and they wish they would have been able to have him in their life as adults, and have him, here. Would have John been more successful? Like, would he have been like, very, very well known if he would be alive today? And the answer would be yes, he would. And he would have had a lot of accomplishments. But, like I said before, a lot of souls transition over to the other side, because it is that time, or because darker souls cause this to happen before it's supposed to happen. That's what I'm getting there. So let me get into the next slide here. Viewer discretion is advised before I get into this next slide. It is the murderer, the person that assassinated John Lennon. So, if you're an empath or very uncomfortable with energy, you may want to click off the video now, especially if this is getting to be too much for you and you need to kind of, take some time to breathe. You can always come back to it. But here we go. This is Mark David Chapman. He is the guy that carried out the assassination of John Lennon on December of 1980. And he was a fan of the Beatles, someone very twisted. Okay, so I'm going to let you look at his picture, his photograph. I can't look at his eyes for a very long period of time without feeling disgusted and feeling all this evil, creepy and evil energy that is surrounding this man and his soul. Now, this man is still living. And I do feel like he has a lot of mental issues. He's someone who is a darker soul, definitely not someone that is stable. He has no remorse for what he did. In his mind, he feels innocent, and he feels like he did the world a justice. He wanted to like kind of be someone that, um, you know, was known in history, will be known throughout history as the person who murdered John Lennon. I don't feel like he has any kind of remorse at all. He is psycho. I'm sorry to say it like that, with being that's kind of ugly for me to even say that, but he is a psychopath, and he is someone who is like be compared to the equivalent of Norman Bates. You know, he would be a threat if he was to be released. This man was supposed to be on, he was eligible for parole many years ago, and he's been denied parole every time that he has a parole hearing. These are facts that I'm giving right now before I get into the soul, but just an awful, nasty energy. And I feel like if he was to be released, what I'm getting from Spirit is that he would be a threat, and he would go on to kill other people. Definitely not a good energy at all. Um, I do feel like he didn't act alone. I do feel like there was definitely some darker energy around him, an entity, possibly possession. He was a very religious person. You would think that religious people are not necessarily going to be influenced, but they are actually more so magnets a lot of times for the demonic and for things of that nature to take over. I do feel like he was, he would have killed other people if he would have never been caught. He would have gone on to kill other people, and he has plans if he was to get out on parole, to carry out more plans and more celebrities. I do feel a lot of sickness and disease with him, so there's something going on with him in his body. I feel like there is like eventually there is going to be cancer or something with him. And again, I can't diagnose anyone, so I'm not a doctor, but this is what's coming through from Spirit. There's like a lot of illness within his body, and I feel like he's been possessed for quite some time, and he's had a lot of darker energy coming in and out of him in prison. So there is definitely a lot of that that's affecting his health. I do feel like anyone that would be his cellmate or around him would definitely feel negative energy. There could be physical manifestations, basically hauntings within the prison, people that are around him. I do feel like he, when he carried it out, I don't feel like it was David Chapman that did it, but actually something dark in him, which he did it, but I mean, there was something dark in him at the time. And when I say dark, I mean demonic. Um, you know, uh, when he did it, they did a statement with Paul McCarthy, and Paul said the words, oh, when they asked him about the murder of John, he commented something along the lines, "Drag, isn't it?" Which a lot of people took it as to being, how should I say this? Like there was definitely that's like the rudest thing to ever say about, someone that you shared, but that kind of gives you, shared a brotherhood, so to speak. But that kind of gives you the idea of the energy between John and Paul, the other member of the Beatles. I don't feel like they got along. I feel like there was a lot of bad blood between them. There was definitely, Paul was jealous of John, and I do feel like John had a lot of enemies. I will say that. So, apart from Mark carrying this out, I do feel like there was a lot of other people that had bad blood and were sending negative energy to John. And if Mark wouldn't have done this to John, eventually someone else would have been paid to do it for someone. But there's a lot of bad blood, and I do feel like the statement that Paul made was very rude in many ways. The way it was said, it was because Paul's no angel himself, but it's just so disrespectful to say it that way. Even though he apologized or kind of like retracted or kind of, try to repair that statement that he did, the fact is that it came out. When people say things the very first time, there's definitely something there behind that. To be asked about someone that's your an ex-band member of yours, and that you spent many years touring and on the road, living together, and performing, and for you to talk about their death and say drag, isn't it? It's kind of like just very disrespectful in many ways. So there was a lot of backstabbing, a lot of things that I could go on, like I said, and talk about, but I don't feel like Mark David Chapman is ever going to be eligible for parole. I do feel like they're going to try to keep him behind bars until he eventually will end up, dying in the prison system. That's exactly what I'm getting from Spirit. I don't feel like, I feel like John has forgiven him, but at the same time, when Mark, transitions into Spirit, there is going to be some accountability on the other side as well. So, I could go on and talk about all the members of the Beatles, but I may do that as a separate video to just the Beatles themselves, and kind of discuss the energies between them and, what goes on, what went on. But for the most part, this is exactly what I see for John Lennon. This is my video, regarding him. Like I said, I could go on. This video could be maybe an hour or two long, but that's a little bit too long. So I'm just gonna. I gave you exactly, what I got from him, and what were the main talking points, what he wants people to know about this. And one thing that before I end the video that he is saying is that people were asking after he was shot, could have he been saved in some ways? And the answer is yes. Again, I do not agree with the autopsy and the medical examiners and the people in the hospital that he was taken to that said that apparently they tried to revive him or they tried to work on him, but he had lost a lot of blood from the way that he was shot. I'm getting from my spirit guides is that doctors are not always right. We know that for a fact. Regardless of where the shots were on his body, he could have survived if they would have rushed him to the hospital. There was a lot of time delayed. I don't feel like the times that were registered are accurate. I do feel like he lost a lot of blood because there was time wasted between the time that he was shot and the time they took him to the hospital. And the CPR wasn't administered right away, even though there's, documents saying that they did try to revive him. I don't feel like there was a lot of panic, and I do feel like they did not act quickly. If this would have been handled in a different way, he would have, survived it. Like when Selena, the Tano singer, was shot, she was shot and it hit one of the aortas, I believe, on, in her shoulder, in the chest area, shoulder. But she ran yards to get help, and that kind of damages the heart. It kind of makes it more difficult for the blood to pump out, and you kind of bleed out faster. And that's why she passed like she did, so quickly. But John didn't run, he didn't run after being shot. So even though the shots said that they, it damaged some blood vessels and stuff, I do feel like he would have had a strong chance of surviving. But, there's a lot of foul play that took place, and that's all I can say. So even though he was, this guy on the photo here, Mark David Chapman, carried this out, could have John Lennon survived had the proper medical resuscitation and procedures had been carried out in modern times? And I get the answer would be yes. But again, this is the 1980s, and it's a different period of time. There wasn't enough advanced medical things, and just the way that things were handled was a lot of lost time. But I do get that he would have, been able to survive had certain things been carried out. So there was a lot of foul play around all of this. Definitely a lot of foul play. But that is the reading for for John Lennon. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Big angel hugs to each and every one of you, and blessings and love and light.